of U.S. Strategic Command, we'd like to welcome back General Hyten, who is making his first appearance before this committee as the Commander of U.S. Strategic Command. We thank you for your many years of distinguished service, General. Over the last 2 years, civilian and military leaders at the Department of Defense, from the Secretary of Defense on down, have warned this committee about, quote, a return to great power competition. Nowhere is this reality more evident than in Russia and China's intensifying efforts in the nuclear, cyber, and space domains, which are the focus of Strategic Command's mission. Russia continues to wield nuclear threats against allies that stand up to its aggression in Ukraine. It's well on its way toward completing the modernization of its strategic nuclear forces, as it's gone out of its way to deploy new nuclear capabilities not limited by the New START Treaty. Russia's deployment of a new nuclear ground-launched cruise missile in violation of the 1987 INF Treaty is a clear signal of the elevated role of tactical nuclear weapons in Russian military doctrine. Moreover, this violation leaves the United States as the only country in the world abiding by treaty limits on its intermediate-range missile forces, a dangerous asymmetry that has implications for effective deterrence not only in Europe but the Asia-Pacific as well. Merely hoping that Russia will return to treaty compliance is insufficient to the seriousness of this threat. That's why Russia's violation of the INF Treaty is so significant, because it calls into question basic assumptions about U.S. nuclear policy, assumptions we must be prepared to reevaluate given the new realities of our strategic environment. China has one of the world's largest and most comprehensive missile forces, continues to modernize its nuclear capabilities by adding more road mobile systems and submarine-carried nuclear weapons, and continues to pursue counter-space capabilities designed to limit our use of space. Beyond Russia and China, the breakneck pace of North Korean nuclear ballistic missile and nuclear testing in the past few years means that a North Korean missile tipped with a nuclear warhead capable of reaching our homeland is no longer a distant hypothetical, but an imminent danger. And Iran's continued development and testing of advanced ballistic missiles suggests that its nuclear ambitions may have been delayed, but they've not been dashed. These growing nuclear threats from great powers and rogue states indicate that whatever well-intentioned hopes we have had after the end of the Cold War, the United States can no longer seek to reduce the role of nuclear weapons in our national security strategy or narrow the range of contingencies under which we would have to consider their use. That's why Congress has demonstrated its support for modernizing each leg of the nuclear triad, including replacement for the Air-Launched Cruise Missile through Annual Authorization and Appropriations Act. Modernization is not cheap, but it is affordable, just 2% of the defense budget over the next 10 years, according to the CBO. General Hyten, you told the committee last year that any program delays or reductions in funding will increase the risk to strategic and extended deterrence mission requirements, negatively impacting global stability and our national security. We look forward to your assessment as to whether there may be any such delays. Finally, we understand that the Department of Defense will conduct a nuclear posture review, the first since 2010. That previous nuclear posture review stated Russia and the United States are no longer adversaries, and prospects for military confrontation have declined dramatically. What a relief. General Hyten, the committee is interested in your assessment of how the strategic landscape has changed since the last review and what assumptions need to be re-examined. With respect to space, after years of prodding from this committee, I'm pleased and in some respects impressed with Strategic Command's enhanced focus on responding to Chinese and Russian activities in space. We've come a long way in the past few years, but the fundamental fact remains our space superiority is at risk. Russia and China are intent on exploiting our dependence on space to achieve an asymmetric advantage. To that end, both countries are investing significant resources in achieving real progress as they pursue, test, and demonstrate a full range of capabilities such as anti-satellite missiles, co-orbital weapons, jamming, and cyber. General Hyten, you were the architect of the space enterprise vision when you were commander of Air Force Space Command. I look forward to hearing more from you on what is required to sustain our space-based military advantage. Senator Reid.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me join you in welcoming General Hyten to the committee. We're grateful for your service and for the dedication of the many men and women who serve with you. General, in a speech you gave earlier this year at Stanford Center for International Security and Cooperation, you talked about the enormous responsibility you have assumed in ensuring our nuclear deterrent is capable of deterring threats that are existential to our homeland. It is a sobering responsibility of the one who will give advice to the President on the options before him and then be the one who must direct the execution of those options. And we appreciate the skill and the fidelity you bring to that task. Thank you, sir. The President has directed the Department to conduct a nuclear posture review to outline our strategy and posture. I look forward to considering that review when it is completed. As the Chairman noted, the last one was done in 2010, and the threat environment today is considerably different. The most significant developments are Russia's nuclear modernization and its bellicose threats about its nuclear capability, and the significant advances made by North Korea in its nuclear missile programs. But there are other troubling advances. China is fielding its own SSBN that will patrol the Pacific, which will hold most, if not all, of our homeland at risk. In addition, Pakistan and India continue to develop their nuclear capabilities with tactical and long-range missiles, which in some cases reach well beyond their borders, affecting nations to which we have made security commitments. In other words, General Hyten, while Russia, with its near-peer nuclear standing, is and should be the focus of the next nuclear posture review, the landscape is quickly shifting. It has become multipolar, and how we structure our deterrence and the military options are changing rapidly. Finally, we are now coming to grips with our own nuclear modernization. Because of the existential threat it deters, there has been bipartisan support for modernization of the nuclear triad in this committee. I am hopeful that this consensus continues because this is a 20-year acquisition program extending well beyond this and future administrations. Let me touch on a few other topics. In the area of space, we will value your expertise to develop long-term requirements and plans to counter the asymmetric threats to our space assets. I assume that will be discussed further in tomorrow's closed session. In the area of missile defense, you are responsible for synchronizing global missile defense planning and operations. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the state of our homeland and regional systems. The administration has called for a missile defense review, which also needs to address the topics contained in a provision of the FY17 Defense Authorization Act, which include left-of-launch missile defeat capabilities, cruise missile defense of the homeland, the role of deterrence in missile defeat policy. We look forward to hearing your thoughts on this review and the ongoing improvements to our interceptors, sensors, and command and control system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to the testimony.
Welcome, General back, General Hyten.
Thank you very much. Good
morning. By the way, your complete statement will be made part of the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reid, members of the committee. Since the end of World War II, strategic deterrence has underwritten our nation's security and preserved our way of life. Our nuclear force has been and always will be the backbone of our nation's strategic deterrence. Today, the nuclear force of the United States is safe, secure, reliable, and ready. It is the foundation of the combatant command I'm honored to lead. However, in the 21st century, strategic deterrence is more than nuclear. It is the integration of all our capabilities in all domains, across all the combatant commands, other governmental organizations, and alongside our allies. The global security environment we operate in has changed. Our adversaries are developing advanced nuclear and conventional weaponry that rivals our systems in capability and capacity. They fully understand the warfighting capability that cyber and space can enable. To maintain technological and operational superiority, our military must stay ahead of our adversaries. We must adapt and modernize. The primary focus of our deterrence modernization efforts must address the entire nuclear infrastructure. First, the platforms, the ICBMs, the submarines, nuclear-capable heavy bombers with their associated tankers. Second, the actual nuclear weapons themselves. And finally, the nuclear command and control architecture that enables the entire enterprise. They're all essential to the security of our nation. At a time when our adversaries have significantly modernized and continued to upgrade their nuclear forces, nearly all elements of the nuclear triad are operating beyond their design service life. Any recapitalization program delays will further diminish these capabilities and affect our ability to execute our mission. Space is a warfighting domain just like air, ground, maritime, and cyber. We must normalize how we plan and operate in space. The same concepts that govern other military operations also apply in space. Efforts taking place with the interagency, allies, partners, and commercial industry industry to develop capabilities, integrate and execute operations is beginning to pay dividends. Our integrated missile defense network continues to disseminate across the globe as a sign of our commitment to our allies and to shared common defense. Ballistic missile proliferation is increasing as more countries acquire greater numbers of ballistic missiles while simultaneously advancing technical sophistication to defeat U.S. defense systems. In response, we must continue to advance our missile defense capabilities and forces to assure allies and deter adversary aggression. We are managing the Unified Command Plan elevation of U.S. Cyber Command, which I fully support and engage with on a daily basis. Meantime, we also remain engaged with the Joint Staff and with United States Special Operations Command as they assume primary responsibilities to previous Stratcom missions of joint intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance and combating weapons of mass destruction. U.S. Strategic Command is a global warfighting command. All of our deterrent forces remain safe, secure, reliable, and ready. The morale of the force is also very high. They understand, again, the critical importance of our missions. Nevertheless, the U.S. faces significant challenges in sustaining the critical capabilities that underpin our strategic deterrent. Our nation's strategic capabilities must be a core focus of our national security spending, and I'm sure that sustained congressional support from this committee, combined with the hard work of the exceptional men and women who support U.S. Strategic Command, will ensure we remain ready, agile, and effective against both current and future threats. So I look forward to engaging with you today and throughout my time as the U.S. Stratcom Commander. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
General Hyten, as we discussed and has been made well known, the Russians are in violation of the INF Treaty. Is that true?
Yes, Chairman, that's true.
And what does this mean for the threat to the United States and our European allies?
It's a concern that we have to look at across the entire spectrum of what Russia has been doing. Russia has been modernizing their entire nuclear force. They started an aggressive effort in 2006. They continue that to this day. This breach of the INF Treaty that caused the deployment of a ground-launched cruise missile is a concern to us because we have not seen that for quite some time. It's another element we're going to have to consider as we look forward to how we deal with Russia.
How do we deal with the INF, with the ground-launched cruise missile itself?
A single ground-launched cruise missile is not a significant threat to the United States or allies. It shows the beginning of a deployment of a structure that could be a threat in the future.
If it's deployed in a significant number, what does that do?
We have no defense for it, especially in defense of our European allies. That system can range and threaten most of the continent of Europe, depending on where it is deployed. We'll talk about that in detail in the closed hearing tomorrow, Senator, but it is a concern, and we're going to have to figure out how to deal with it as a nation.
Certainly a compelling argument for Vladimir Putin's disregard for most norms of behavior that the Russia at post-Soviet Union used to adhere to, or even during the Soviet Union times.
I believe that the United States has only effectively dealt with Russia over the years from a position of strength. I think the only way we can deal with them in the future is from a position of strength. And I think the work of this committee and the work of my command can help that strength be established so we are in a good position to have future discussions with the Russians.
Seems to me to gain or regain that position of strength, we need to give you some help. Is that right?
Yes, sir. I'm asking for help on modernizing our entire forces and making sure we have the force structure that is needed to make sure we can deter not only today but in the future.
And what would be your priorities?
Senator, my priorities are to modernize the platform elements of the triad. I think when you look across the force,
which are?
The platform elements of the triad are first the submarine, the Ohio-class replacement program, the Columbia. That is number one on the issue. The next is the GBSD, the ground-based strategic deterrent, the replacement for our Minuteman ICBMs. The third piece is the B-21 bomber with the long-range standoff weapon associated with that. That's the replacement of the Air Launched Cruise Missile. The second piece of the puzzle is the modernization of the nuclear weapons. The nuclear weapons themselves have to be modernized so they can last well into the coming decades. And finally, a very important piece that I'm probably most concerned about right now is the nuclear command and control modernization that we have to have as we move into the coming decades.
Under the present circumstances of sequestration, do you see any way of achieving all those goals?
Senator, if we don't get stable budgets, you know, when I spread all those programs out across the table, and I have, and I look at when they all deliver just in time. Take one example, the Columbia submarine. Every year that program, if it slips 1 year, then the future commander of Stratcom is down 1 nuclear submarine. 2 years, 2 nuclear submarines. We know that because there's a certain time in the future where the Ohio-class submarine just will not go under the water anymore. Just the pressure on the vessel itself will not allow it to go down. That has to stay on time. If each of those programs delivers just in time, and we don't have stable budgets, we know we already have a broken program. So I'm very concerned about the ability to have stable budgets to support those programs.
And what does a continuing resolution do to you and your plans that you just outlined?
A continuing resolution makes it very hard to start new programs, which many of these programs will be new program starts. Each of these programs will ramp up in terms of funding over the years as we move from development phase into production phase. Every time you have a continuing resolution, you can't ramp up the funding you need in order to do that. Every time that happens, you have a delay to the program. Every time that happens, you have a break to a contract. It's a very significant issue in terms of cost to the taxpayers as well as risk to our national security.
And the men and women who are serving under your command?
Yes, sir. I talked a while ago about the improved morale. One of the great things I saw when I came back to U.S. Strategic Command was the morale in the submarines and the missile fields and the bombers and the space capabilities, the cyber capabilities. But they understand how important it is what they do, but they also are dealing with very old equipment. We have a commitment to them as a nation that we need to give them the tools they need in order to do their job. Their enthusiasm can only last a certain amount of time. If we don't follow through on that commitment, that morale will be brought into question.
Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, General, thank you for your service. In last year's National Defense Act, we asked for a review of all the options against our potential threats, left of launch and right of launch. And one of the issues that I think you'll talk about in detail tomorrow, but is in public, is the very short time between a warning and a launch in many of our adversaries. And that the left of launch is something we have to look at. Right of launch, the first issue is boost phase. And can you give us an idea here of where we are with respect to boost phase interceptors?
I can give more information in the closed hearing tomorrow, but at a general level, we don't have a significant or really any boost phase intercept capability. It is a very challenging technology because you basically have to be properly positioned with the right kind of weapons capability in order to respond to an immediate launch. If you look at the North Korean launch on February the 11th, out of a new location, new capability, a new transporter erector launcher, all those things bring it the time of warning down to a very small number. So therefore, you have to be properly positioned. Now, I'll talk tomorrow about some new technologies that are becoming available that I think can begin to address that for the first time, but it's not in the near term, Senator.
But if we can pursue these technologies successfully, it would provide a significant advantage given the current deterrents we have.
Yes, Senator, I can't think of a better thing than if somebody launched a threat missile to drop it right back on their head.
The nuclear posture review, as we've both noted, is underway. Can you give us kind of an overview of the significant threats that this review will deal with and illustrate for us?
So the nuclear posture review just kicked off, 6 months timing asked for by the administration and the Secretary of Defense. So we're going at that in a second. The first thing we'll look at is the threat scenario. We'll look at Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran in particular. to make sure we understand what those threats are. Iran is in compliance with the JCPOA right now, which is keeping that nuclear capability down, but they still have aggressive missile programs that we need to look at. So we will look across that spectrum of the threat. We'll look at what Russia is doing in terms of violation of the INF Treaty, and then we'll look at military options in order to respond to what we see in the threat. That's the basic structure of the nuclear posture review.
Thank you. One of the disconcerting comments that the Russians continue to make is that they have a strategy now of escalate to de-escalate with nuclear weapons, and I think you quite succinctly described it. Escalate, de-escalate is not that; it's escalate to win, which forces us to escalate to stop them from winning, and it's a, no pun intended, but it's an escalator to catastrophe, in my view. So, can you comment upon that statement and your how do we deal with that?
So I think it's one of the most challenging military questions you have, and the good news is that we're addressing it with our geographic commanders in large-scale exercises. We just did one with European Command. We'll do one with the Pacific, where we actually address what those situations really would look like. It's important that we look at them seriously, understand what those pieces are. When we say escalate to win, what does that really mean? And in order for us to win, we have two choices. One, to prevent that escalation, or two, respond in such a way after that escalation that they would want to stop any aggression that they have going on. Both of those are challenging situations, and we have to walk through the various options, which we are.
It would seem to me also that there has to be some means to communicate to avoid sort of the misstep, if you will. Is that part of the gaming you're doing? It's kind of how do we communicate our intention not to accept this, but to engage again? Is that part of it?
I continue to advocate engagement. I know Secretary Mattis has said we've had a long history of engagement, but not a long history of success. I certainly agree with that statement. But nonetheless, I would like to have an aggressive State Department engagement, an aggressive Department of Defense engagement that includes mill-to-mill engagements with my counterparts in Russia, China in particular. I think it's always better to be able to pick up the phone and talk to somebody before something bad really happens, to have some kind of relationship. I also want to look across the table and make sure they understand I'm very serious about this business.
Thank you very much, General. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator.
General Hyten, I think we would all ask about the same questions that have been asked by the previous two members. And it's always a surprise when people find out that there's some question as to whether or not we have the capability that we know around this table and that we don't have. You've said that, of course, we made it very clear we have the oldest nuclear arsenal in the world, warheads and bombs produced 30, 40 years ago, the B-52 and all of that. When the last time the 10-year posture review took place, there are some assumptions. The chairman mentioned this in his opening statement. One of the assumptions, and this was for the 2010, number one, Russia is no longer an adversary. And number two, and this is kind of disturbing, though the role of nuclear weapons in the United States national security and U.S. military strategy has been reduced significantly in recent decades, further reductions can and should be taken. How do you respond to that, those two assumptions?
So
bring that forward to the current day.
So I think it's from a military perspective, I think it's always important that anybody that has the threat to fundamentally destroy your nation, which is what Russia and China both have, they have to be considered an adversary. I think not considering an adversary causes you to make decisions that could put the nation at risk. Therefore, I've always considered Russia to be an adversary, a strategic competitor. I think it's important for us to look at Russia that way. The second piece of the equation, if you look back not just to the 2010 nuclear posture review, but if you look back 20 years, and that's across multiple administrations, multiple Congresses, change of leadership in the military, if you look back the last 20 years, you see a fundamental de-emphasis of nuclear weapons in our national security strategy. and then look at what our adversaries have done in response to that. I think the assumption would be if we lower the reliance on nuclear weapons, that our adversaries do the same thing. They did just the opposite. Russia in 2006 started a huge aggressive program to modernize and build new nuclear capabilities. They continue that to this day. New ballistic missiles, new weapons, new cruise missiles, significant air-launched cruise missiles capabilities, now the ground-launched cruise missile capabilities. China has done the same thing, hypersonic glide vehicles on both sides that bring new threats to bear. Our adversaries have taken the exact opposite view of our de-emphasis and have emphasized those nuclear capabilities once again.
That's right. They say further reductions can and should be taken. That kind of tells where we have been. It's very disturbing, and I think tomorrow in a closed session you might be thinking about an answer to the question, because you say that Russia has always operated from a position of strength, and we need to talk about the relative strength between us and Russia. The last thing I'd mention is we haven't spent quite as much time that I feel it would be justified with North Korea. It was Admiral Gorton, he said it was prudent to assume, now this is a year ago, that North Korea could conduct a nuclear strike on the U.S. despite assessments of a very low probability of success. Well, that has changed now, I think. They have advanced a long ways. I think in your statement that North Korea are actively developing ballistic missiles that could range. The continental United States conducted a nuclear test in September of last year and appeared to be preparing to conduct another test in the near future. It's very disturbing. If you were to look at the Russia, China, and North Korea and Iran, what would you pose or believe would be the greatest threat? What bothers you the most?
I think Russia is the greatest threat. What I'm concerned about most nights is North Korea, because we do have an effective deterrent today that I believe deters our adversaries. And if you watch the way Russia acts, every step is slow, but they are taking steps forward. China, they are acting, but every step is measured. North Korea, I'm not sure exactly what they're going to do tonight. Every time there's a launch, February 11th, March the 5th this year, the whole network comes up. We bring the entire power of my command to bear on the problem, the power of Northern Command. We're looking at what we have to do. The Pacific, they're all involved. Those are very concerning moments to me, because we're not sure, every time they launch, we're not sure if this is a threat missile or not.
Well, I think you'd probably say that North Korea is different from the rest in that they're totally unpredictable. Is that accurate?
They are, I guess totally unpredictable would be a fair statement, sir, because every time they launch, I'm not sure what that launch is going to be. That would be the definition of unpredictable.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General, for being here today. I want to follow that line of thinking, because in your statement, and you've been clear with us that our nuclear capabilities are the foundation and the bedrock of our defense, and certainly we saw that deterrence model during the Cold War, and you talked about it just now in terms of China and Russia. But do we have any reason to believe that North Korea is deterred at all by our nuclear armaments?
I would have to say that they're deterred to a certain extent, because fundamentally the existence of their nation is threatened by our strategic deterrent capabilities. So there is a deterrent value, but their actions clearly show that the deterrent is fundamentally different when we think about North Korea. What impacts Kim Jong-un, what impacts the North Korean actions is a very difficult thing to understand, to get after. But the thing about North Korea is that given where it is on the globe, it's very important that our actions are in line with our allies, especially South Korea and Japan, to make sure, because they talk about in your backyard. It is in the backyard of South Korea and Japan.
And so as we look at what options we have to respond to what North Korea is doing, clearly sanctions are one, and we've imposed those, and there's an effort to look at even stricter sanctions. what other options do we have in response to what North Korea is doing?
So I think there's any solution to the North Korean problem has to involve China. I'm a military officer. My job is to provide military options to the President, and along with the other combatant commanders, I will always have military options ready to the President if he deems in association with Congress that there's something that we have to do. I'll provide those military options. So that's my job. But I look at it from a strategic perspective, and I can't see a solution that doesn't involve China.
But China suggested they don't have as much influence as we think that they do. Do you think that's accurate?
Again, if you talk about in your backyard, China is the definition of North Korea's backyard. And so the trade that North Korea has really goes north across the Chinese border and south from China into North Korea. That is a significant element. But I'm a military officer, not a State Department official or an economic expert. But I just look at the world, and it's hard for me to see a solution without China.
You briefly touched on cybersecurity in your opening statement, and more we're seeing that cyber is being used as a weapon by our opponents. Should we be, I've asked this question to several generals and have not gotten a very clear answer about how we better coordinate our cyber activities and whether we have a cyber strategy that involves not just responding, but also being aggressive about how we use cyber. How should we be thinking about that? And do you think that's an accurate assessment, or am I missing something?
So I think it's still an element that's a subject of significant discussion. So I'll try to clarify it from my perspective, and hopefully that's helpful to you. From my perspective, there's two elements of cyber. One is the military element, and the other is the broader civilian use of cyber. And they require two different sets of authorities. But when I look at the cyberspace domain, the authorities that I think we need as a nation are no different than any other authorities that we have in space and air and land and maritime. We need to have the authorities that if there is a bad actor, a bad guy that is in the cyberspace domain, the focus of our military has to be to attack and eliminate the bad actor. But we can't do that in a way that impacts the domain that we're operating in. But we shouldn't be restricted on following that actor wherever that actor goes.
Well, and don't in fact we have blurred lines when it comes to cyber today, because we have, or at least based on what I've read, it appears that we have cyber actors that are doing the work for nation states, but they may not be in the military. So how do we address those kinds of threats?
So to me, the question is, what effect are they trying to create? If the effect they're trying to create is a military effect, then it's the responsibility of U.S. Cyber Command to be able to respond to that. If it's a criminal effect, it's not the responsibility of Cyber Command. It's the responsibility of the Department of Homeland Security working with the FBI and other elements to work with those kind of pieces. We need to draw those lines clearly and focus on the effect and the target, not on the domain itself. When we just focus on the domain itself, that's when we get all the confusion, because cyber is everywhere.
Right.
Why should we stop a military action because it happens to, a server happens to be located in a specific territory, including the United States? We have to look at it as an operating domain. The effect and the target are the key.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
General Hyten, thank you for your service and for your testimony today. Mr. Chairman, I would like to add into the record at this point an article in DoD News by Jim Garamoni, published March 31st of this year. General, in this article, you state that we need to spend roughly 6% of the defense budget to modernize our country's nuclear arsenal. That would be an increase from 3.5% currently. Over what period of time do we need to increase from 3.5% to 6% of the defense budget?
It's, in broadest terms, it's 30 years, but that's not a perfectly accurate, because there will be a peak and a valley. So it will peak as we go into the significant production levels. That'll happen in approximately 10 years. That production peak will continue for roughly another decade as we deploy the new capabilities across each of the platforms I discussed earlier, and then it will drop off again over the last. But roughly, it's a 30-year time frame.
Well, how about for the next few years?
For the next few years, there'll be a significant plus-up, but it won't grow to 6.5% until we actually get into the development programs, which are a couple of years away.
Okay, and you quote approvingly the Air Force Chief of Staff, General Goldfein, in this article. Is this a position of General Goldfein?
That is the position of the United States Air Force and General Goldfein and the Acting Secretary Disbrow.
Is it the position, to your knowledge, of the Secretary of Defense?
To my knowledge, the Secretary of Defense supports, I know he supports modernizing the triad. He testified in front of this committee to that effect. But we will address all those issues in the nuclear posture review with the new administration. Just to emphasize that point again, I think it's important to remember the new administration will take a look at the entire threat posture, the entire modernization plan, but the Secretary of Defense, the Air Force leadership have all, and the Navy leadership have all pledged support to modernizing the triad.
Now, in mentioning your priorities in response to an earlier question, you mentioned 5 priorities in modernization, and the first one you mentioned was submarines, the Ohio replacement or the Columbia class. So I was interested to see that you listed that first. So would it be correct to say that not only is the first thing you mentioned, but it's your first priority?
So the first priority is the triad. Inside the triad, the first priority is the submarine.
All right.
But it's important to note that the triad as a whole has to be modernized. Nonetheless, if we don't get after the submarine, then we run a very precipitous risk in about a decade as the Ohio class reaches end of life.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question. You painted a pretty grim picture of the future of the Ohio class if we don't start moving. And I think you said that it will be dangerous to actually put it under the water.
There's, you can probably tell from my uniform I'm not a naval officer.
I do see that.
But I do have good friends who are naval officers, who are submariners, and they've gone through the analysis with me in detail, including my deputy, Vice Admiral Chaz Richard. We've gone through that in detail, and they can tell me that each submarine is built to go down under pressure a certain number of times, and once you reach the end of life, you know when that is, and you can predict very accurately when that is, and once you reach the end of life, it can't go down anymore. A submarine on the top of the water is not an effective deterrent.
And that end of life might occur as soon as when?
It starts towards the end of the next decade. I can go into the details of when that would be in the closed hearing tomorrow, but it's towards the ends of the next decade.
What can you tell us in this venue today about the modernized features of this new Columbia-class submarine?
That's, I think the most significant element of the modernized feature is the actual nuclear reactor. The nuclear reactor on the Ohio-class systems basically required a refuel and refit midway through its service life. The Columbia-class will have a 42-year reactor. So once it goes in service, besides the normal maintenance and routine servicing, it will not have to come back for a refueling of the reactor, which will allow us to operate with 12 Columbia submarines versus 14 of the Ohio class.
What about advanced materials in these new subs?
There will be significant advanced materials, but I can't talk about that in detail in this hearing. But it will be materials that will increase the survivability and performance of the submarine in the threat environment.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, General Hyten. For the hearing last year, this posture hearing, the written testimony had this quote in it: "There is continued adherence to the new strategic arms reduction New START by both nations." That's a quote, and that meant the U.S. and Russia. Is that still the case?
That is still the case, Senator. The next key date is 2018. That's when we have to meet the New START limits. We're on track to do that as far as we can tell. The Russians are on track to do that. But that 2018 date, early 2018, we'll watch that very closely.
That testimony was also in the testimony from last year. We are on track to achieve New START limits of 1,550 deployed warheads and 700 deployed delivery systems by February 2018, and as far as you know, we are on track and the Russians are on track for their obligations as well.
I know we are on track, and the reports I get from the intelligence community and from the State Department is the Russians are on track as well.
Have you been directed to review the agreement or in any way change our plans for compliance with the agreement?
I've not been directed to review the New START agreement. I am reviewing the INF agreement based on the recent breach of that agreement by the Russian activities.
But in terms of compliance with the New START agreement, you've not been directed to review or offer advice about changing strategies on compliance with New START?
No specific direction on that, Senator.
In your opinion, would it be in the U.S.'s strategic interest to increase our nuclear weapons stockpiles?
I've stated on the record multiple times, I'll state it on the record again today, I support the limits that are in the New START treaty. I also look out to the future and understand there are non-accountable weapons, especially on the Russian side, that we need to start addressing. But from a strategic weapons perspective, I support the limits that are in the New START treaty.
Senator Wicker was asking about the Columbia class. Will the Columbia class require a change in the design and plans for the Trident missile, kind of a design change?
It will not require a design change. We'll be able to walk into that, but Admiral Terry Benedict, the Director of Strategic Programs in the Navy, has begun to look at the Trident to make sure that we have a plan for how we would modernize that capability sometime in the future, but that's not on the near-term list or on my priorities to worry about right now.
Thank you for that. You have a brief section of testimony at page 13 of your written testimony about cyber. Working, I think it says here, I applaud the direction signed into law in the FY17 National Defense Authorization Act and remain committed to the elevation of U.S. Cyber Command to a unified command as soon as possible. Could you talk a little bit about what is the status of efforts to do that? Are there milestone date sets and milestone dates that have been set, and what is our progress toward those milestones?
Admiral Rogers and I, the commander of U.S. Cyber Command, we've submitted our plan to the administration. It's now going through their evaluation. The administration gets a vote, the Secretary of Defense gets a vote. So I'll just say that both Admiral Rogers and I would like that to happen sooner rather than later, just to normalize that command and make sure that we can kind of develop normal command relationships between Cyber Command and all the combatant commanders, including U.S. Strategic Command.
And this is a consensus set of recommendations that you've delivered to the administration.
We have.
Okay. Last question is this. Anti-access area denial systems are more commonplace now. Does that render weapons like the B-61 sort of becoming obsolete, and is there a need for additional systems like gravity bombs as part of a future deterrent to take care of the A2AD systems?
So I think from the air perspective of the triad, the three elements, a stealth bomber, which is the B-21, that can penetrate air defense systems, a gravity bomb that could provide flexible options, because that provides the most flexible element of the triad, because that gives the President the most time to make a decision. And then the air-launched cruise missile, basically improves the flexibility of the B-21, because really the last thing you want to do is have a bomber that is only able to attack a target right below it. You want it to be able to reach out. So those three elements together create the most flexibility in the air leg of the triad, and that's our recommended program that the Congress has supported.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, General. It's a pleasure to see you again. We've had some discussion on this in previous questions about the different geopolitical landscape that we're living in today, and some describe it as a return to the great power competition. Russia and China are deploying far more capable nuclear systems than they were in 2010. What implications do you think that this has on our nuclear forces, and specifically, do you believe it increases their importance and the need to modernize them? You've touched on this, but I'd like to hear your firm answer.
So the key element is always having a ready, reliable strategic deterrent, and we have that today. So even though our adversaries have modernized their nuclear capabilities, we still have an effective deterrent. The question is, will we have an effective deterrent 10 years from now and 20 years from now? The answer to that has to be yes. That's why we have to modernize, and that's why it has to be a significant priority for this country. deterrence is going to be expensive, but war is always more expensive than deterrence.
The chairman asked you about the platforms and the need to modernize those, and you were referring to the B-1 and the GBSD, the LRSO, the Columbia class, and the need to continue on and meet those deadlines and meet them in a timely manner to make sure that we do have the resources necessary. When we look at the new posture report that's going to be coming out, do you believe that that report should validate those programs?
I do, and I've stated that to the administration. I've stated that to my boss. But the nuclear posture review should look at the entire enterprise. It should also look at things beyond what's in the triad. We should look at what do we have to do to respond to the INF breakout? What do we have to do to respond to a now ground-launched cruise missile? Hypersonic glide vehicles are threats that both Russia and China are building now that are very, very significant in terms of our ability to see them and provide warning. We need to figure out how to deal with those. But I think the baseline is the triad, and the baseline is modernizing the triad.
And in response to Senator Inhofe, you were talking about the escalate, de-escalate in our relationship with Russia. And a former Secretary of Defense, Harold Brown, said in 1979 that the Soviet spending has shown no response to U.S. restraint. When we build, they build. When we cut, they build. From your comments, I would assume that you agree with those remarks from Secretary Brown.
Well, I look at the evidence, and the evidence is when we de-emphasize nuclear weapons, both our primary adversaries, Russia and China, both increased their focus on nuclear weapons, advanced capabilities. They also looked at now threatening space and threatening cyberspace. They went a significant direction in a different deterrent element than we did. So I believe you always have to look at your adversaries and understand what they do, and then make sure you're in a position of strength relative to your adversaries. That's what deterrence is all about.
The chairman also asked you about Russia's violation of the INF Treaty. Do you believe that we need to respond to that violation? The previous administration talked about counterforce options and countervailing capabilities, active defenses, but ultimately took no action to develop those. Do you think that we need to now?
I think every step that Russia takes has to be responded to. This is just the next step, and we have to figure out as a nation how to respond. It's not necessarily a military response, but the nation has to figure out how to respond.
And in this setting, can you tell us which options you believe would be the most effective?
No, ma'am, not in this setting. And it's those choices are my boss's choices as well. And so, but I'll be glad to talk to that in a closed hearing tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. In your opening statement, you note the unauthorized flights of unmanned aerial systems over Navy and Air Force installations. Can you discuss this in greater detail, and are these incidental activities, or do you believe they're deliberate actions?
So I think so far they've been incidental activities, but the fact that they're occurring, and then if you watch what is happening overseas in the CENTCOM theater with the use of lethal UAVs and the use of UAVs for surveillance on the part of a terrorist adversary, I'm very concerned that those same kind of UAVs could be employed against our weapons storage facilities, especially on the nuclear weapons storage facilities. So just in the last week, I've signed out guidance to my forces to give them kind of parameters on how they should respond to if they see a threat UAV or a surveillance UAV, and to give them specific guidance so a young Marine at Kings Bay or an airman at F.E. Warren doesn't have to worry about what should I be doing when I see that. So I provided very specific guidance. It's classified guidance, but I'd be glad to share that with the committee.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General Hyten, for your leadership and for your generosity with your time yesterday visiting my office. I just quickly want to ask you about the importance of our non-military foreign assistance and other civilian instruments of national power to your mission. General, is it accurate to say that you work with the State Department and other civilian partners on nuclear non-proliferation and other efforts to detect and deter strategic threats to the United States?
We do. We have a very active role with the State Department, not just on the nuclear side, but on space and cyber as well, because each of those is a very international set of issues, and the State Department has been very aggressive in working those issues along with U.S. Strategic Command and the other combatant commands as well.
Thank you. And the budget proposal put out by the Trump administration calls for about a 29% cut to the State Department and significant cuts to other agencies with international responsibilities. General, I want to ask you a narrower question. Would funding cuts to agencies that conduct diplomacy and to other civilian functions make your job easier or more difficult?
So I'm not an expert on the budgets of the
I'm
other
not asking you to be
departments.
one.
But I can tell you that I feel I desperately need, and all the military commanders need, an active foreign engagement process that uses the Department of State. We need that kind of partnership. We need the State Department reaching out into the international community. It can't be left to the military to do those kind of pieces. The State Department does. I've had great relationships with men and women in the State Department that have helped us significantly over the years. We need to have that continue into the future, as well as other departments that
And I take it from what you're saying, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just have limited time here, that significant cuts would make it more difficult for you to do your part of your job.
And I would have to look at where the cuts are, and I haven't looked at where the cuts are, but I need that support.
You need that support. So let me ask you another question, General. As you know, the Nuclear Command, Control, and Communications, NC3, system is critically important to providing secure and agile communications between our field forces and the President in case of a nuclear attack or other nuclear-related emergency. And you expressed concern before this committee last year about the aging capabilities of the NC3 system and the need to modernize it. And as Chairman McCain noted earlier, you publicly said just last month that, quote, any delay, deferment, or cancellation of NC3 modernization will create a capability gap, potentially degrading the President's ability to respond appropriately to a strategic threat. I assume you still feel that way, is that right?
I do. It's my biggest concern on the modernization effort.
Biggest concern. So let me ask you, are you confident that the Department is providing the funding and staffing necessary to keep NC3 on track?
I'm confident that the Department has taken the right steps. We do not, the funding is now rolling in the right place. The staffing is not quite there yet, especially on the Air Force side. We had a hiring plan that was delayed slightly by the hiring freeze. We were given authority to waive that for critical nuclear missions. We've done that through the Air Force. The Air Force is now beginning to hire those folks. But the challenge is, once you start hiring those people, it's not like overnight that all of a sudden the problem is solved.
Yeah.
They have to come on board, become experts. That takes a matter of time. So even though the funding is flowing, we have a good plan, people are coming, it is not an overnight solution to the problem, which is why it requires constant attention.
I appreciate that. We need to have a secure and reliable NC3 capabilities, which is why I agree that NC3 modernization without delay should be a top priority. We have the most potent nuclear triad on Earth, but it becomes much less useful if NC3 ages out and doesn't work effectively. I have just under a minute left, but I'd like to ask you very briefly about the resiliency of the satellite constellations that we rely on for civilian and military communications. Do you have confidence in the ability of our communications satellites to withstand jamming, and how are you thinking about integrating our satellites into the Department's overall operational plan?
So I have not been happy with how we're structured from a resilient perspective with satellite communications. So there's two elements. Number one, I think we need to change our architectures and build a more resilient architecture so that we can more effectively fight in the future. And the second piece of that is that we have to figure out how to use the capabilities we have today in a better way. We have actually built significant anti-jam and warfighting capability into many of our satellites, but we don't have the means to effectively command and control it at the time of a fight. We need to work both of those things, Senator, in the future.
Thank you, and we can do more follow-up on this later. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Hyten, first of all, thank you for your service to our country. In the Defense Science Board's February of 2017 task force report on cyber deterrence. Two recommendations are provided to improve the cyber resilience of the U.S. nuclear forces. One recommendation was that the Secretary of Defense direct you to conduct an annual assessment of the cyber resilience of the U.S. nuclear deterrent, including all essential nuclear components. These would include nuclear command, control, and communications, as Senator Warren was alluding to, the platforms, delivery systems, and the warheads. Specifically, you would be directed to state your degree of confidence in the mission assurance of the nuclear deterrent against a top-tier cyber threat. What do you consider to be a top-tier cyber threat to our nation's nuclear systems?
So I see a top-tier cyber threat being Russia and China in particular, because they have the ability to threaten the existence of this nation. And so one of the reasons you have to be able to protect the nuclear command and control capability is because it's fundamental to deterrence. If that's ever brought into question, that lowers our deterrent posture to top-tier threats, and we have to make sure we never allow that to happen.
What can Congress do to help you mitigate this threat to our nuclear systems?
I think the Congress can be very demanding of the services to make sure that as we modernize our nuclear command and control capability, we just don't modernize a 20th century architecture. In other words, move from 8.5-inch floppy disks to 5-inch floppy disks. That's really not of interest. We have to modernize the entire architecture. And so as you see the modernization plans coming in, make sure, number one, it's the 21st century information architecture, and number two, make sure that we are cyber secure as we go through that, because we will introduce cyber vulnerabilities as we walk into that. But if you work it right from the beginning, you can make sure that that threat is mitigated as we go forward.
The Defense Science Board also recommended that the DoD acquisition executive oversee immediate establishment of a program of action with milestones to support cyber certification of U.S. nuclear forces, as well as nuclear command, control, and communications. This certification process would assume concerted adversary attack against nuclear systems based on extensive preparation. Examples are attacks via the supply chain, insider threats, and physical sabotage or attack, in addition to remote cyber attacks. Are you confident that the timeline for initial and full operational capability of the cyber mission teams that are tasked to support your command are proceeding at a pace that would enable you to meet such a certification? I noticed that you indicated that perhaps the Air Force is a little bit behind in their time frame.
Yeah, so the answer is yes and no, Senator. Yes, I'm happy with where the cyber mission force is going right now, but the no part is that I don't think the cyber mission force currently has the capacity necessary to meet all of the requirements that we have across the department. We've also divided the cyber mission force into, assigned to different combatant commanders. So I have certain assigned elements of the cyber mission force. General Scaparrotti does, Admiral Harris does. I think we have to start looking at cyber like we look at special operations as a high-demand, low-density element that we need to allocate to the highest priority, and we have to look at that from the top level down. And I'll work with inside the department to advocate for those kind of capabilities, because the demand signal is going to go nowhere but up, and the capacity is not sufficient to meet all of the demand.
As you know, until now, DoD has envisioned a force of up to 100 combat-coded B-21 bombers. I'm very concerned this number may be a budget rather than strategy-driven determinative. Also, I have heard discussion within the Air Force circles of the need for a larger number of these aircraft, based purely on operational requirements. Do you think we may need more than 100 of these aircraft?
So I have not seen the bomber vector roadmap yet from the Air Force. I've put a demand signal out from my command to the Air Force to let me see that plan as soon as you can, because I want to be able to support that plan, but I have to see it, I have to see the details to understand it. From the top level, I think 100 is sufficient from an operational perspective, not a budget perspective. And the reason I think it from a top level is that I have a certain requirement in the New START for a certain number of nuclear-capable bombers, and then we have an additional capacity on the conventional side, and when you put that together, you come to about 100. Nonetheless, I haven't seen the details yet from the Air Force. I'll see the details shortly. I know it's done. General Rand and General Goldfein have both told me it's about done, but I need to see that so I can better answer that question, Senator.
Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General Hyten, thank you for being here. Thank you for your leadership as well. General Hyten, in your response to advanced questions that you submitted to this committee last September, you agreed that additional analysis is needed before making a decision on whether to deploy an additional missile defense site, including analysis of the missile threat specifically from Iran. You have also indicated that you believe the response to missile threats must consider the, I think, quote, the entire package of capability, from additional interceptors to supporting sensors and command and control. In your testimony today, you identify 3 necessary missile defense upgrades, including upgrading the kill vehicle of ground-based interceptors, continued development of long-range discriminating radar, and improving regional missile defense capabilities. And I understand that some of these investments would improve a potential additional missile defense site, would also be a part of that package, and may make sense to make that investment. But in March of 2015, briefing to the Subcommittee on Strategic Forces, Lieutenant General Mann, former commander of the U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense Command, affirmed that the ground-based mid-course defense system remains our nation's only defense against an ICBM attack. So without making a judgment, and the question is now, without making a judgment on deploying an additional missile defense site, I don't expect that today, but if the decision is to deploy a new missile defense site, how long do you expect that construction would take? How long would it take to come online?
So the specific question is, once you make a decision on an additional site, you're many years, 5 to 10 years away from that site being able to come online. So based on my confirmation hearing and my lack of full depth into it, I've met with Admiral Searing, the director of the Missile Defense Agency, a few times now. We've gone through his programs. We can talk about that in a little more detail in the closed hearing. But fundamentally, I see a need to have a reliable kill vehicle, a multi-object kill vehicle, better sensors, including a space-based layer for the mid-course discrimination, and then additional capacity. But I want to make sure that those priorities are understood to the committee, because those priorities are important to me, because if we just go for the additional capacity, I'm not sure we're going to be making the right architectural decisions about how we deal with the pending threat in the future. And I want to make sure we do that right. And we have some time, not a lot of time, but we have some time to make those decisions. We will have a ballistic missile defense review in this administration, in addition to the nuclear posture review. That will be another 6-month study that is not yet to kick off, but will soon.
Well, I want to expand a little bit on the some time. So we have to, as you mentioned, you have to make the decision first to go forward with the site, but then you're looking to anywhere from 5 to 10 years before that site actually becomes operational. And my concern is that if we wait until a country like Iran, for example, develops missiles that threaten the homeland, we may be too late, given that long timeline. That's why I know that work on environmental impact study for potential sites is already underway. But maybe your assessment, are you confident that if, even if we started today over 5 years or the 10 years, we would be able to construct these sites, that the missile threat from Iran and elsewhere will not continue to grow or eventually outpace our ability to bring these defenses online?
So I'm always concerned about timelines because our acquisition system has not been very effective in the last 10 years in delivering things on time. So when I give broad statements like 5 to 10 years, it's broad because the acquisition system is not very reliable in terms of defining what those pieces are. It's broad because there's policy debates that have to happen, but I think we're going to have to make that decision pretty soon about where we're going to go. I think we have the data we need, and we'll feed that into the Ballistic Missile Defense Review, and I would expect coming out of the Ballistic Missile Defense Review some very specific recommendations about what we have to do that will probably come from the Missile Defense Agency.
All right. Thank you, General.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for your testimony today, General Hyten. I appreciate your candid comments, the comments that we had in our discussion yesterday in the office, and I'm grateful that we can have an open session so the folks in the Midwest can hear how important Stratcom is to our global safety, and the fact that Stratcom is only 45 minutes from my hometown of Red Oak makes it even that much more important to the folks living in Southwest Iowa. So look forward to hearing more on your answers today. We did talk a little bit about the Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee that I chair, and I do appreciate your comments about Stratcom and its contribution to developing the third offset strategy. That is very important in our discussions in that subcommittee. And yesterday in the meeting, you highlighted the need to also incorporate the concept of operations associated with the third offset strategy as we look towards defining it. From our nuclear triad to the stealth capabilities, it is vital to national security that the United States continues to stay ahead of its adversaries, and you've talked about a number of those today. Can you explain the importance of developing a third offset strategy, specifically as we watch our adversaries develop capabilities that match our own?
So I think the third offset strategy, in its most simple terms, is what is the next fundamental step that we have to take as a nation to jump ahead of our adversaries. That's what the first two offset basically were when you look back at time. I think the opportunity we have right now is how do we fundamentally change the human-machine interface? How do we change the whole command and control structure? How do we actually get to new capabilities? But as we look at these technologies, and we look at the technologies both in Silicon Valley and in Cambridge and a number of places where the Department of Defense is engaging, we have to put that in an operational context. You just can't take a commercial technology and say, boom, there's your magic third offset. You have to figure out what is the operational construct that we're going to use in order to do that. In space, the Deputy Secretary of Defense have said that the Joint Integrated or Interagency Space Operations Center, which we just renamed the National Space Defense Center, so that everybody can understand finally what it is. It's a National Space Defense Center, was the first operational element of that. Because basically, we put a bunch of smart people in a room with a bunch of capabilities and said, figure out how to go faster. And it's amazing how fast they've been able to go when you break down all the barriers. This nation can go fast. That's what the third offset's really about. But our acquisition process likes to go slow. So that'll be the challenge. How do we go fast in defining what the third offset is? How do we define those things and build them quickly? How to deploy it in the force to stay ahead of our adversaries and not become too bureaucratic about the next step?
I appreciate that. And you mentioned breaking down the barriers, and we had a great conversation, a little off topic, but a great conversation about acquisition yesterday in the office. And do you think our failing acquisition system is impacting our ability to develop and procure the new technologies that are necessary for that third offset?
I think the challenge that we have is that it's not the people that do the acquisition. They're still spectacular people. But we haven't delegated them the authority and responsibility, and we don't hold them accountable for making the decisions to deliver capabilities. All those decisions are brought up into this town, into the Pentagon, into the Capitol, and it hurts the ability of a program director to actually make the decisions, work with the industry, and deliver those capabilities. They spend all their time trying to get a program through the Pentagon, not trying to deliver the capability we need as a nation. I think fundamentally we have to change that focus, to let those great people that do that business every day focus on delivering those capabilities and then hold them accountable. Because I grew up in that business as a young lieutenant and a captain, and my bosses were held accountable, and there were some spectacular failures. But I always remember there's 10 people in line to step up and take those jobs because they wanted the authority and responsibility.
I absolutely agree, and I think that's something that this committee should work on. Thank you, General Hyten, for your time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I know that you recently toured the 37th Helicopter Squadron at Warren Air Force Base, and my question really concerns the fleet that protects the ICBM fleet and the National Capital Region. In early February, the Air Force announced their anticipated request for proposal for the Huey replacement program, as you know, that was to be released at the end of February, would not occur until this summer because none of the companies offering a replacement helicopter were able to meet all the threshold requirements. The Huey replacement program has been discussed in some form or fashion since, I think, 2001. The most recent acquisition strategy had the first operational helicopter delivery scheduled for the first quarter of FY20. and it's now another year delayed by Air Force estimates to the second quarter of FY21. In my view, we can ill afford this kind of delay. You've written, or I have written numerous letters to the previous administration urging that they expedite this replacement. Do you have any opinions as to what can be done to expedite this program? Do you agree that it should be expedited? I guess the first question.
So of all the things in my portfolio, I can't even describe how upset I get about the helicopter replacement program. It's a helicopter, for gosh sakes. We ought to be able to go out and buy a helicopter and put it in the hands of the people that need it, and we should be able to do that quickly. We've been building combat helicopters for a long time in this country. I don't understand why the heck it is so hard to buy a helicopter. I wrote the requirements document for that helicopter when I was Director of Requirements at Air Force Space Command in 2007. And we're still, and now it's 2017, 10 years later, and we're still arguing about a helicopter. We had a request for forces in to provide a temporary replacement. I pulled that request for forces from Stratcom because I want all hands on deck to get a new helicopter into the force that we should as soon as possible. All I can tell you, Senator, is as the Commander of Strategic Command, I will put every influence I can on the United States Air Force to deliver that capability sooner rather than later. And I can't tell you how upset I was when I pulled the RFF and shortly thereafter was told that there would be a delay in the program. That's just unacceptable to me.
Well, your very forthright and valuable response has just eliminated a whole line of questions that I was going to have for you. But I do have one more question, which concerns the Columbia class. And by the way, very seriously, I welcome your focus on this issue, and if there's anything I can do, or I hope the committee can do, I don't mean to speak for the committee, but it is a simple but profoundly important problem to safeguard the ICBMs in the North Capital Region.
Hugely important.
Thank you. On the Columbia class, are you satisfied with the pace of development of the Columbia class, which is so important, as you mentioned earlier, to the Triad program?
I am, and I'm very appreciative of the United States Navy for making it the #1 program in the United States Navy. I certainly agree with that priority, but there's a lot of challenges in the Navy portfolio, and the fact that they have made that the #1 priority, and the fact that the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Richardson, is going to be looking at that very closely gives me confidence that we'll get there. Nonetheless, we require stable budgets, stable funding, aggressive approach by the United States Navy in order to do that. All those things are challenging in today's environment, but I'm comfortable with where the Navy is right now.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to associate myself with the remarks of Senator Blumenthal on the helicopter program, and I appreciate that you take the issue so seriously, General. Some claim that the long-range standoff cruise missile, a new air-launched cruise missile, would be destabilizing. Do you believe the LRSO would be destabilizing, and if so, why? If not, why not?
Senator, I don't believe it's destabilizing. I believe it is a critical element of our architecture. We've had air-launched cruise missiles since, nuclear cruise missiles since 1960. The current fleet was first declared operational in 1981. An element of our architecture that our adversaries have significant numbers of like and modernized air-launched cruise missiles that can bring a threat to the United States tells me that we have to be able to have that capability as we look at the future. So I do not believe it is destabilizing. I think it's a critical element of the architecture, and it has been an element of the architecture for many, many decades.
So your recommendation is that we proceed with an LRSO program?
I think it's essential to the modernization of the Triad.
You touched briefly earlier on the concept of having a stealth aircraft that has to be directly over the target. You're referring to the B-21, I presume?
Yes, sir. And
without a new air-launched cruise missile, you foresee a future in which that B-21 might have to penetrate into advanced air defenses rather than being able to use a standoff cruise missile?
So I can show you the details tomorrow. I'll bring a map tomorrow to show you the why we need a mix of capabilities, B-21, gravity bombs, as well as air-launched cruise missiles, so you can see the details. But those three elements are a critical part of the architecture. You want a bomber to be able to range beyond single-point targets. It's not the survivability of the bomber, it's the ability of the bomber to access targets.
But in an unclassified setting, it stands to reason if you don't have a air-launched cruise missile, then the bomber has to be essentially over the target, which means
it has to be over the target,
over the air defense systems.
Which is over the air defense systems in many cases, but it also means that I'm limited to the number of targets I can access.
Stealth technology has advanced considerably over the last 30 years. Are our adversaries' radars advancing as well to counteract our advances in stealth technology?
And they are, and it's a game of point and counterpoint. We make an advance, they make an advance. The B-21 will stay ahead of those advances. We have to continue to stay ahead of those advances. That's another reason why the B-21 is an important element of the architecture.
And another reason why the long-range standoff cruise missile is an important development, because we have to expect our adversaries' radars will continue to improve.
And there's always the opportunity of a breakout too. So you don't want to be stuck in a one solution game when you have the opportunity to have multiple solutions.
Okay. I want to turn to the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. You touched on that briefly earlier. General Silva has stated to the House Armed Services Committee that now Russia has deployed in operational mode a ground-launched cruise missile that violates the INF Treaty. How destabilizing is it to Europe, and how threatening is it to our citizens and troops and interest in Europe for Russia to have that capability?
The single missile is, and I'll show you where it's deployed tomorrow, the single missile is not that destabilizing. The action of breaching that treaty and moving into that area, and if they deploy large numbers and they move them into the west of Russia, that creates a very significant threat to our European allies. And that's why I believe we need to address it right up front. As a whole of government, how do we respond to that decision by the Russians to break out of that treaty?
Is it fair to say that the INF Treaty is a treaty that is more beneficial to the United States than it is to Russia or west of the Soviet Union, since we don't have many enemies on our borders who want to fire ground-launched cruise missiles at us?
So we've notified Congress and the administration that we're going to do a detailed assessment of the INF Treaty from all military aspects. We'll do that as part of the nuclear posture review. But we're also going to do that as provide our military judgment to the political leadership of what that INF Treaty really means to the United States.
And when you say a whole-of-government effort, your point there is that the Department of State and the various international economic agencies and organizations of our government have some role to play as well in determining what the American response to these INF Treaty violations will be.
It's especially the Department of State.
From a military standpoint, is it threatening to U.S. interests to have potential Russian ground-launched cruise missiles counteracted only by 30-year-old aircraft and aging warheads in Europe?
It is a concern to the European theater, a concern to NATO. We have to work it as well inside the NATO alliance. Again, I'm not in NATO. I don't have a NATO hat. I'm not a diplomat. But fundamentally, all of those elements have to look at the problem of a ground-launched cruise missile again, which we haven't seen in that part of the world for quite some time.
Thank you, General. My time's expired.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would appreciate it, General, if your scientists could figure out a way that we can be two places at once. This morning, ironically, there's a hearing upstairs in the Energy Committee where I just went and came back on cyber and our vulnerability. Let me ask a couple of questions. Cybercom is being elevated to a full combatant command, and you've talked about how that's proceeding. The next question is splitting Cybercom and NSA of the dual hat role. What has to happen for that to occur? In other words, where's the benchmark where we can start to talk about, because a full combatant command in Cybercom is a big responsibility.
So I'll describe that in kind of two levels. We can have a more detailed discussion in the closed hearing tomorrow. But at the broadest level, at the unclassified side, we need to, before we separate Cyber Command from the National Security Agency, we need to have Department of Defense, service, owned cyber platforms to operate on. So again, at the broadest unclassified terms, one of the reasons that Cyber Command and the National Security Agency are combined today is because they use the same platform. We need to have a different set of platforms. Now, there are acquisition programs of record being instituted to build those capabilities. Once those capabilities are built, I would be supportive of separating the two, but I will not advocate separating the two until we have a separate platform in the services that Cyber Command can operate on.
I appreciate that, and we can go into that in more detail. Interesting, this is an interesting hearing because we're talking about cyber, we're also talking about nuclear. When we talk about nuclear, all the discussion is about deterrent. That's what you've been talking about all morning, and yet, as near as I can tell, I've been going to these hearings for 3 or 4 years now, there is no coherent cyber deterrent strategy or doctrine. Do you agree that that should be a priority for our country to develop that strategy and doctrine and to make it public so our adversaries know that there will be consequences to or results from a cyber attack?
I think what's missing is a broader discussion of what 21st century deterrence really means. That involves the nuclear capabilities as the backstop, but fundamentally space, cyber, conventional, all the other elements as well. When we talk about deterrence, we tend to fall back 50 years ago to the deterrence model of the 60s, 70s, and 80s when it was a very broad nuclear deterrence discussion where we had mutually assured destruction as the issue.
It was a binary analysis.
It was a binary analysis. And now it's a multivariable analysis. And each of those has to be put in context. And the context has to be the fact that we're actually not deterring cyber, we're not deterring space, we're deterring an adversary that wants to operate and do damage in those domains. That's what we have to deter.
We're deterring aggression, which may come in a variety of forms, one of which could be cyber.
Yes, Senator, that's exactly right. And we have to look at it. And at Stratcom, we've created an academic alliance now with 35 academic FFRDC partners to look at what 21st century deterrence really means and trying to stimulate that debate in the nation, because I think it's important discussion to have inside this nation. What do we really mean by deterrence in the 21st century? I think it is fundamentally different, but we haven't fully defined it, thought through it, and had that public debate.
I agree with you, but I agree that we need to have that public debate sooner rather than later.
Yes, sir.
Because these attacks are occurring virtually daily.
Yes, sir.
One other point on the cybercom elevation. When you're talking about EUCOM or NORTHCOM, you're talking about bombers and tanks and submarines and aircraft carriers. One of the different parts of cyber, it seems to me, is the interrelationship with the private sector, and that a cyber attack most likely will come on the private sector. The hearing we're having upstairs is about cyber and the energy sector. And so cybercom can't be simply a military. There's got to be some, it seems to me, structural relationship to the private sector, particularly critical infrastructure. Would you agree?
So I think when it comes to cyber, we need to focus on the effect that is being created. There's got to be a common shared situational awareness in the cyber domain of what is going on, but the action to respond to whatever the issue happens to be has to be what the threat is and what that threat is trying to create in terms of harm to the United States. If it's criminal, then that's a Homeland Security side. If it's a military action against the United States, then it's the Cyber Command side. But the situational awareness has to be common.
But the defensive side of it may often take place within the private sector, within
the defensive side may be in the private sector, it may be in the private public sector, it may be in a number of different places, but the situational awareness is the key to share.
I'm just suggesting that the new cybercom, when it's elevated, needs to think more broadly than simply within the Pentagon, and has to think in terms of relationships to these private sector critical infrastructure. It's not a typical guns and tanks analysis, because you're dealing with so many of these. The threats are in the private sector. The nuclear posture review that's going on, I'm looking forward to the results of that. Are there things we could and should be doing now on nuclear command and control? That seems to me one of the most serious vulnerabilities.
It is, and we've been a little slow in stepping up the hiring for the the NC3 Center inside the United States Air Force. That's now proceeding, but we have the resources going in the right place. We're hiring the right people, but it's not going to be an overnight solution, because once you hire new people, they still have to figure out what they're going to do so they can move forward. But we need to be aggressive and have very tight oversight of what is going on there to make sure that that doesn't slow down. I think both the Air Force and the Navy are taking it seriously now, but it is building up from a very deficient state.
I just don't want command and control to be lost when we're talking about submarines and
Absolutely.
bombers.
It is my #1 concern from a modernization perspective.
Thank you, General. Thank you.
Senator Perdue.
Thank you, Chairman. General, thank you for being here. I want to echo Senator Blumenthal's comments about your forthrightness. It's very refreshing. Thank you, sir. I want to pursue nuclear development in Russia just a little bit. General Robinson in February of this year told the Toronto Star, and I quote, "Today, Russian cruise missiles can reach us from ranges we're not used to. No longer do they have to enter or come close to North American airspace. That's a game changer." Do you agree with that observation, sir?
I do agree with that.
Sir, in 2012, the National Intelligence Council report stated, quote, "Nuclear ambitions in the U.S. and Russia over the past 20 years have evolved in totally opposite directions. Reducing the role of nuclear weapons in the U.S. strategy is a U.S. objective, while Russia is pursuing new concepts and capabilities for expanding the role of nuclear weapons in its security strategy." Do you identify with that observation, sir?
I do, and I can't help but look at history and say when we started to de-emphasize nuclear weapons, our adversaries, not just Russia, but all our adversaries, started to modernize and build up their nuclear capabilities.
There's some correlation to North Korea development and Iran.
There is. If you look at the
China.
timing, and China.
Yes, sir. Well, we've seen in Russia then, by 2020 it's projected, I think, that Russia's nuclear triad, 70% of its nuclear forces will be replaced by new systems. Sir, if we continue on the current path without a major radical change, what percentage of our triad will be supported by new systems?
By what date?
By 2020, which is the estimate in Russia. 2020, 70% of their triad will be new.
We won't be modernized by 2020.
Right. Then I look at the INF treaty to develop nuclear ground weapons. These are all things they've done just in the last 4 years. Violated the INF treaty, we talked about that. Their expanded deployment of air and sea-launched nuclear cruise missiles, not limited by the New START treaty. You know, what they did in Crimea, they're threatening our allies with nuclear attack. They're actually using it in rhetoric openly now about intermediate controlled nuclear acceleration to to get a deceleration in aggressive posture. But they've also developed things in the sea, underwater nuclear drone, the new nuclear submarine. So my question is, all of this rhetoric, the buildup in cruise missiles, intermediate range nuclear-tipped cruise missiles, and their modernization of their nuclear force, what does all this suggest about the role of nuclear weapons in Russia's nuclear or their total national security strategy?
So it suggests that the nuclear weapons are a primary element of their overall national security strategy. I don't think you can look at, you have to look at their investment. You look at their finances and how much money they're spending in this capability, and the vast majority of their capabilities are going at strategic forces, and that's primarily nuclear, but also space and cyberspace to a smaller amount. But when you put those pieces together, you can't help but say that that is their strategy for national security.
And what does that say to us in terms of our strategy of de-emphasizing this deterrent that we've had for 70 years?
Well, I believe that the last 20 years, we have de-emphasized nuclear weapons, and that has created an imbalance in the approach of our adversaries that we have to address. That's why we need to modernize our capabilities across the board. We have to meet strength with strength. I never want to be able to have to sit down with a potential adversary and have a negotiation from a position of weakness.
I agree, sir.
Ever.
How long will, given that, how long will it take us, given the current procedures of acquisition and development, to modernize the ICBMs over the entire triad?
So we're talking about a 30-year modernization program. We're talking about 15-year of development and production, and then modification and support as we go into the...
So what we're really saying, I know that we're not in a classified environment, and I look forward to that conversation, but so what we're saying then is from the reality today, given our past practice, is that from 2020 going forward, Russia is in a much more modernized position of acuity than the United States, and that will occur over the next 20 to 30 years. Is that correct?
and then we'll modernize, and then we'll have a modernized capability. But the thing about a deterrent capability is it doesn't matter how old it is. It just matters whether it works.
And you're confident today that the triad is
the
operational?
stuff that we have today will work. The question is, will it work 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now? And that's where the risk comes in. That's why modernization has to be a priority. But we are ready today. The force is ready today. The force is motivated and understands they are the critical element of our nation's security.
And that's comforting. And I have one last question, my time remaining. You addressed it earlier about the helicopter, and I appreciate your anger about that, to be candid, sir. But we've also got a situation where in modernizing, you have to go through 60 stakeholders, basically. I think that's been documented. And you've said we don't move fast enough from concept to capability. What can we do? What can we do to help you? What can you do to help us accelerate our ability to be fast?
To me, the fundamental change that has to be is we have to put somebody in charge and just hold them accountable and let them go do their job. And if they fail, get somebody else to go do that job. But we have so many people that make decisions. It takes forever to get through the process and get everybody to dot the I's and cross the T's and make sure everything's okay. It's almost impossible with the structure that we've created to go fast. That structure was created because of problems in the acquisition business. It was created because we had, overruns and problems in the past. So the way we fixed the problem is we didn't hold somebody accountable. We created a new oversight mechanism to make sure that whether it's test or development or whatever it is, we have an oversight mechanism to look at everything and make sure that it's right. We've got to get back to the point where we put somebody in charge and hold them accountable.
Well, that's very refreshing, General. Thank you for your testimony and your service. Thank you, Chairman.
I would point out we made some progress in that direction by putting the service chiefs in a position of responsibility, but we certainly have a lot more to do. Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman McCain, and welcome, General Hyten. So for starters, I want to ask, given the very real budget pressures that we find ourselves in your professional opinion, should our priority at this point be modernization of our nuclear forces through completion of our life extension programs, or should we be prioritizing the expansion of our nuclear forces with brand new weapons designs at this juncture?
Are you talking about the nuclear weapons themselves or the...
Not the personnel, the weapons themselves.
The weapon themselves, I think the focus has to be always ready, reliable weapons. And so the priority has to be the service life extension before we get to new weapons. But fundamentally, at some point in the future, we have to be able to transition to those new weapons. And the labs are very engaged in making sure we know exactly what the status is. I think the lab directors are some of the most incredible people that I've probably ever met. And they give me very good advice about how to do that. But the priority has to be the life extension first, because you always have to be ready. And then when and if do we have to modernize and change the structure?
Well, I share your sentiments about the lab directors, and we had a good briefing with them recently. Do you want to say anything else about the sort of sequence of the LEPs to ensure that we continue to have the near-term risk mitigated, or would you rather save that for another setting?
I think I'd like to save that for a different session.
Let's go on to talk a little bit about New START. What are the defense and intelligence benefits of the inspections, the database, the unique identifiers of Russia's strategic nuclear forces that we have secured through that arrangement, and what would be the implications if those provisions went away?
So I can't give you the details of what we've learned in this forum, but what I can say at an unclassified level is that we get huge value from a bilateral, verifiable treaty that allows us to see exactly what our adversaries are doing from a strategic weapons perspective. Now, the thing about a bilateral verifiable treaty is they also get that kind of insight from us. So that always has to be part of the calculation as you go through.
Absolutely.
But we have understanding of exactly what those capabilities are. They have those understandings of what our capabilities are. I think when they look at them, they get an assessment of the readiness of our force and the ability to provide a deterrent. I think that's a powerful message, and we get a message in return.
Yeah. Do you think you get that both sides obviously get a little bit of a window into intent and posture that mitigates risk so that unintended consequences don't lead to an unnecessary escalation?
Absolutely. And I think every time that Well, I'll just say, when you walk in and you see a nuclear weapon for real,
Yeah.
and you see the readiness of the force to do that, you don't want that to be employed against you. That is an element of deterrence that is, I think, one of the most powerful elements of deterrence there is. You actually have to see it to embrace it. And when the Russians see it when they come here, when we see it when they go there, that helps the deterrent posture across the globe.
Yeah, I have to say, I think that's a very insightful comment, and I would encourage all of my colleagues to make the effort to see our deterrent up close and personal. It's a very sobering impact that has. And as somebody whose father lived through some of the test phases, I think the closer people can come to seeing the reality of that, I think the better their decisions will be made down the road. I want to ask you one last question before my time expires. Los Alamos Lab is the designated center of excellence for plutonium research. In your view, does our current strategy maintain the critical facilities and the capabilities for plutonium technology, and are we on schedule to meet the required production of plutonium pits by the late 2020s?
So the answer is yes, but I have concerns about the requirement in the late 2020s. I can't remember if the number's classified, so I just won't say the number.
That's fine.
But
the focus on those facilities needs to be acute.
The focus on that facility has to be there all the time. In the near term, I'm very comfortable with where we are. It's really 10, 15 years from now that I have concern about maintaining the necessary capability to generate what we need for weapons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Hyten, thank you for being here, and thank you for wearing that Carolina blue shirt. The Tar Heels wore it last night when they won the national championship, or a similar
really?
color.
I'm glad I could help you out, Senator.
Breaking news.
I wanted to really follow on to some questions that I think Senator Perdue got to at the end of it, and really made me think about asking it when you responded to the question from Senator Blumenthal regarding the helicopters. You know, we've got an acquisitions environment now across all of DOD that thinks it's okay to take 10 years and 700 pages to spec the next generation handgun. Fairly simple. The kind of weapons you're talking about are slightly more complicated. So I'd like to talk more about things that you would like for us to consider in terms of authorities or constraints that we've placed on you or the department to really get to the root causes of some of these problems and delays that are very costly and at the end of the day threaten our national security.
So it's interesting for me because so I started off in the acquisition business, and then I went into operations, and I was happily an operator for almost 2 decades, and then the Air Force called me back in to be in acquisition again as a 2-star. And so I came back in, and there was all these things that were broken. And so the first thing I did is I read the federal acquisition regulations. I actually read them. It was quite painful, but I read them. And then I read the JSIDS process for requirements, the DOD instruction that talks about, the chairman's instruction that talks about how you do requirements. And what struck me as interesting is the law, the regulations, and the policy that has been put in place for requirements and acquisition actually allows you to be as streamlined as you want to be. It's all written right there. It's legal. You can do all those things. We just have chosen to implement a process that is not responsive.
How do we fix that?
I think what we have to do is you have to eliminate a lot of the bureaucracy that's in the middle.
Who is that on?
I think most of it is in, well, I'll just describe from my perspective the way it was built. The way it was built was, first we said we're going to reform acquisition with the Defense Acquisition Workforce Improvement Act, and that was about 25 years ago. And we said we're going to have a streamlined authority from a program director to a program executive officer to a service acquisition executive to a defense acquisition executive. And at that time, those staffs were very small. In fact, the PEO staffs, the program executive officer staff, were in some cases 9 to 14 people. But then the OSD staff grew. And then the service staff had to grow to match the OSD staff. And then the PEO staff had to grow to match the service staff. And then the program office had to grow in order to match those pieces. So to me, you have to take every one of those and cut it out and go back to what was the intent of the law 25 years ago, which is the chain of command is the program director to the PEO, to the SAE, to the DAE, and nobody else can get in between.
Do you see any evidence that that's being addressed seriously?
No, sir.
And without that, then our modernization, the things that we're doing for service extension, they all suffer because there's an inherent cost and delay in new capabilities. Is that correct?
That is
Somebody
correct.
needs to own that. Actually, somewhere in these organizations, they need to own it. And it's remarkable to me, in just the 2 years that I've been here, that we're having the same circular discussions at the expense of you being able to do your job even better than you're already doing it.
And but the other thing I'll point out is that we also need stable budgets.
Well, I agree. That's where I think we become the root cause of the problem, because if you're making long-term investments and we're living paycheck to paycheck through one-year CRs and we consider that success, we're a part of that problem. But it would really help us, I think, to get some insights into exactly what you talked about. We'll follow up with your office. The last question I had were things, it had to do, it just reminded me based on something you said earlier about you have certain weapons that have reached their end of life or appear to. There were some people in the prior administration were concerned that maybe we were moving too quickly to decommission certain weapons, and I thought I heard from you all that in fact they had reached their usable life, and if you didn't decommission them, that there was just going to be additional cost and risk in maintaining them. Is that still a problem?
I don't think it's a problem. We have a significant weapons inventory. When we get down to 1,550 accountable warheads, we have significant warheads in the inventory to allow us to do that now and for the foreseeable future. So I supported the decommissioning of those weapons. My predecessor did as well, just because we have a number that we have to meet and we have the capabilities that we're needed to meet it. We don't have to walk down any further.
Thank you. I look forward to the hearing tomorrow.
Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And General, thank you for your testimony and your service and your frank assessment on some of these issues. I appreciate your written testimony focusing on missile defense, and I'd like to dig into some of those issues this morning. It's when, not if, that North Korea is going to be able to range the continental United States with an intercontinental ballistic nuclear missile. Isn't that correct?
I believe it is, sir. I think they already have the capability to deploy an intercontinental ballistic missile. The question is, when will they be able to make a nuclear weapon?
So it's going to happen. I mean, we have classified estimates of when it's going to happen, but you can say publicly that's going to happen.
Yes, and I'll show you the dates the classified or the intelligence community predicts that will happen when we talk tomorrow. It's fairly broad, but I'll show you those dates.
So one of my concerns has been, if we know that that's going to happen, which we do, and the day that that does become public, that they can do that, I think there's going to be a big demand. It'll be on the front page of all the newspapers and magazines that, you know, the leader in North Korea can range Chicago or Miami or New York City with the nuke. There'll be a lot of demands to do something immediately because of that. So if we know that's happening, it's my view that we should be focusing a lot on missile defense to make sure that we'll have 99.9% chance of shooting one or two or three of those down and be able to say publicly, if you do that, we'll retaliate massively. That'll buy who's ever in the White House some time. We talk about sooner. I think it's sooner rather than later. Can you give the committee a sense of why the date February 11th was so important in terms of this very troubling issue?
So thank you, Senator. I'm a big supporter of missile defense. I have been for my whole career. But February 11th was a very important date because that's the date that
February 11th of this year.
The North Koreans launched a new, solid, medium-range ballistic missile off a new transporter-erector launcher. They published pictures for the entire world to see out of a place we'd never seen before. That showed a new technology, a new North Korean capability to employ a very challenging technology for us because a liquid missile has to be...
Liquid fuel you're talking about.
A liquid-fueled missile.
Versus solid fuel.
Versus solid. Has to be stacked, fueled. It takes time, and we can watch. A solid rocket can be rolled out and launched at a moment's notice. And if you noticed our history of building ballistic missiles, In the early days, we built liquid-fueled rockets, and we had some challenges because liquid fuel is a dangerous thing to try to keep ready and on alert. A solid is a much better solution. So all of our inventory now is solids.
So that was a major advancement by North Korea.
It was. They moved what was demonstrated at sea onto land, onto a new launcher, and did it in a very quick way.
Let me ask you a related question. You talked about the history of our programs in terms of rockets. Do you think there's a culture that we have now with regard to missile defense? We had a provision in the NDA last year that required the Missile Defense Agency to test at least once a year, tried to test at least once a year. Do you believe we have a culture that focuses too much on always having successful operations in terms of testing? Why is it important to also allow us to fail?
I think I've become part of that problem too, because when Admiral Searing tests, I'm either on the phone or waiting for that email that says, did it work, did it work, did it work? And that fundamentally creates the wrong kind of test environment. If you look at where North Korea is doing, test, fail, and I look at what I did when I was a younger officer in the space business, that's how you go fast. Von Braun, in the early days of the rocket business, he had a 60% failure rate, maybe the greatest rocket scientist of all time. Can you imagine if Admiral Searing and Missile Defense Agency had a 60% failure rate, what the newspapers would say? In reality, we should be asking, was that a successful test? Did we learn what we needed to do to advance the system? And were we testing fast enough? Because North Korea is going fast. Test, fail, test, succeed. And they're learning, and you can see them learning, because that's the way you do the rocket business.
So you think we should be doing at least testing once a year? And can we help with regard to that narrative and culture to make sure you're learning, but not always having to make sure it's a quote-unquote successful test? Can a test that doesn't hit the target still be a successful test?
In many cases, we'll create conditions where we don't want to hit the target, and then somehow we'll still be portrayed as a failure. But we need to understand how long the interceptor can fly. We need to understand various things about a test. A test program is not just about hitting the target. Ultimately, the system is about hitting the target, and we have to learn fast as we go through that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, it's good to see you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for being here. I enjoyed our visiting last month about the priorities for strategic deterrence and how to improve our capacities going forward. I want to focus a few minutes on questions involving space, which is one of the topics you and I discussed. Last week, your deputy, Vice Admiral Richard, testified before a space security conference about offensive space capabilities and weapons that are being developed by China and Russia. He said that, quote, "While we're not at war in space, I don't think we can say we are exactly at peace either. With rapidly growing threats to our space systems, as well as the threat of a degraded space environment, we must prepare for a conflict that extends into space." General, in your judgment, how significant is the threat to our space-based assets? And what would the impact be to our operations if they were degraded?
So it's significant and it's growing. You have to ask yourself why we have adversaries that are building weapons in space, weapons that can deploy into space, weapons that can jam our satellites, weapons that can jam GPS. Why are they building that entire infrastructure? It's not because they're interested in the peaceful use of outer space. It's because they're looking to threaten the United States. And they've watched us for the last 20-plus years, ever since Desert Storm. They've watched us employ space to create a fundamental asymmetric advantage on every battlefield we're in. And they understand that if they're ever in a conflict with us, if they can't challenge that advantage, they have a significant potential to lose. That's why they're committing such a huge amount of their national treasure to building those kind of weapons and capabilities. Our job is to make sure that we can always respond, always defend ourselves, always make sure that asymmetric advantage that we've built over the years can be maintained in any conflict. We have to do that. Now, we hope to deter that conflict by demonstrating that to our adversaries, but nonetheless, if it does extend into space, we have to be ready to fight it.
To what extent does our weapons targeting and navigation depend upon active GPS and live satellites?
You know, it's interesting is that the first space war is often referred to as the Desert Storm, the first Gulf War. But in that war, very few precision munitions In fact, no precision munitions were dropped with GPS guidance. The only precision munitions were laser-guided munitions then, and everybody remembers the video on television from that. But now, almost every weapon we drop is a GPS-guided weapon. Almost our entire force structure is built on GPS guidance as we go through that. Our dropping of logistics off of aircraft are GPS-guided airdrop systems now. The timing system for many of our weapons is GPS. Our artillery systems are guided by GPS. The Guided Multiple Launcher Rocket System, GMLRS, is a GPS-guided system in the Army. The Navy systems are GPS-guided. We have basically taken that huge advantage. So in the future, we have to look at precision navigation and timing as a mission and build resilience in that architecture as well as defending GPS on orbit.
What fail-safes are there in the event of GPS or other satellite systems going down for our weapon systems still being able to operate, or for that matter, to what extent are our troops drilling in a no-satellite environment regarding navigation or weapon systems or otherwise?
So about 6 years ago, the Air Force did a study called The Day Without Space. And in that, they basically went to Nellis and on the range took GPS and satellite communications away from the aviators. And it was not good. We were not ready to do that. But since that time, we've basically relearned how to operate in a GPS-denied environment, in a SATCOM-denied environment. We actually have a lot of those capabilities built in. We have the ability to use inertial navigation system. We have the ability to use a compass and a map. Maybe we were spoiled because space was a benign environment. GPS was always there, and so we just assumed that it was going to be there. We can't assume that anymore. We have to train for that. We have to train in all the service and then build resilient systems to make sure that we have the capability to fight in any situation.
Russia's aerospace forces are potentially working to deploy an anti-satellite weapon on its interceptor aircraft. A VKF squadron commander was quoted as saying, quote, "A new missile is being developed for this aircraft capable of destroying targets in near space." General, how realistic is the threat to our satellites from Russia, and how should the U.S. respond to that threat?
So the threat from China is actually more near-term than Russia. I'll show you the specifics tomorrow in the closed hearing of what those threats are. But I can tell you that it's real, and they wouldn't be committing resources to building that if they didn't have some intent to use it in a conflict. And so when you see statements by Russian officers and Russian leaders about building capabilities to do that, I mean, why would they do that unless they were sending a message?
So what should we be doing about it?
We have to build, number one, we have to always defend ourselves. So we have to build the ability to defend ourselves against any of those threats. And number two, we have to build an offensive capability to challenge their capabilities in space as well. And we'll talk about what we're doing in that in the closed hearing tomorrow as well, Senator.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
General, thanks very much, and we'll look forward to tomorrow, and thank you for a very informative and helpful and important hearing. Thank you. We're adjourned.
Thank you, Senator.